Welcome, everyone. My name is Mary Ma, and I'm a member of the Kellogg Alumni Relations team. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual series, This is Kellogg. Today's presentation will last about 1 hour. We encourage you to submit any questions for our speakers at any time via the Q&A icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. We will address audience questions towards the end of the program. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on Kellogg's YouTube channel next week. With that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Dean Francesca Cornelli to start the program.
Happy New Year, everybody. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to the restart for the winter quarter of our virtual series, This is Kellogg. We talked about artificial intelligence in the fall quarter, and in the winter quarter, we're going to talk about something so important and in the mind of all of us, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I am so delighted to start the series by interviewing a giant. I mean, also physically, I have to say, because when you cannot see the distance between us when we are close, but also in the field. Jim Lowry is a business icon, a sought-after speaker, a strategic advisor, and a nationally recognized expert in the field of supplier and workforce diversity, and a pioneer in the field. He was the first African-American consultant for McKinsey. Then he became the first African-American senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. And there he leads the firm's workforce diversity, ethnic marketing, and minority business development. But in general, he's been an expert, and then he had his company, and I'll tell you in a moment why I know everything he's done, which is his book. I'm going to talk about it in a second. But the thing is, he's been a force in this area, and also he's been a great Kellogg friend. He is a member of our Global Advisory Board. I am delighted to have his advice, especially these days, in leading our diversity, equity, inclusion. And he started, and is been a leading force of the Kellogg AMEP, which is the Advanced Management Education Program. And we will talk more about it because we are so proud of that. But how did I discover a lot about Jim? And Jimmy did not ask me to do publicity, but this is also how all it started. Jim came out with a new book, Change Agent, a life dedicated to created wealth for minorities. And I started reading it, and I was blown away for the amazing story, the life, your spine life. I mean, you spine such an amazing history, and you were so central to so many things historically. I mean, the knowledge you accumulated. And you know, while I was reading it, I was thinking about today, what is it? Also, it just so exemplifies what we believe in Kellogg. For example, we always think, people have to adapt, be flexible, be ready for new career, adversity come, and you adapt. And Jim, I would say your career has been all this, reinventing and newing. He's been a TV celebrity also, but he's been so many things and always finding, the best, a new thing to build on. And also, the human-centric element of Kellogg. I've seen it in Jim. What comes out of the paper of the book for me, Jim, is you join new places and immediately form relationships, strong bonds, believing in people and mentoring and push them forward. It's so important. And at the same time, yes, his relationship is human, but that commitment to quality. Throughout the book, it always talks about, but we produced a report, even when it's your company, right? Highest quality, because that's what I feel, right? You have to be committed to a relationship, you have to be committed to communication, you have to be understanding, you have to be inclusive. That doesn't mean you're sacrificing commitment to quality and high standards. So, it's been amazing for me. So, this is the best endorsement I could give because I loved it. And then I thought we have to show off that gem and what is about Kellogg. So I'm gonna pass it and now ask Jim to talk. I just want to mention any question you have, start putting them in, because if they fit with the question, I can weave them in immediately. Now, I want to start from the beginning because really you were a pioneer in so many things, right? And you were the first Black consultant at McKinsey when you were hired in 1968. How was it like?
It was scary. No, but seriously, I mean, when you think about when I joined in 1968, so obviously I'm giving away my age because that was a long time ago, but it was during those times, it was some very challenging times in our society. And you know my history, so I'd worked in the Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps director in Peru. I came back, I was discovered by Bobby Kennedy in Peru. He recruited me to work in Brooklyn. So I was knee deep in that, and I worked in his special project called the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation, and I was a community organizer. I was a community organizer before the president. So I was out there trying to change the world, and then I got a call from a headhunter and said, "How would you like to interview for be a consultant at McKinsey?" I kind of knew about McKinsey, but I didn't know in depth or how important it was, or many of the people like on your campus, they identify with BCG, McKinsey, and they want to get a job there. So I said, why not? So I went through 10 interviews. And so I was finally selected. I didn't know how historic it was, but I was selected to be the first Black at McKinsey. And so you're leaving the Bedford-Stuyvesant inner city, now traveling via the subway to end up at 245 Park Avenue. And so there you were. And the only thing I said, okay, I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm going to learn what I have to learn. I'm going to be successful. And back in those days, and I guess for many of us now, I couldn't afford to fail, because if I was going to be the first, I had to open the doors for many others to come behind me. So that was my motivating factor. But it was scary at first.
That's amazing. And I love the why not. Exactly. You have to try and do, and there's the right spirit. So, right. But what are lessons that you took that are still relevant today?
Oh, no question. No question. Because I mean, back in those days, as you know, most of the McKinsey consultants came from 5 schools. I mean, 5 schools. And we know the 5 schools. And so many of them had been trained in analytics, in terms of research and being able to write in a certain way. I had not. I was a international economic MBA or a PA. And I said, I gotta change. I have to change the way I look at the role. I'm not a community organizer. I am a consultant with one of the world's greatest consulting firms. And at that time it was global. So I had to learn. I had to learn how to write as a consultant. And it was very different, because we write to either persuade or dissuade very, very important people. So there was an art form in that. I had to learn how to solve problems in a very analytical way, which I was not trained. So it was very scary. And I think the other things I had to learn very quickly is how to be an effective team member. So because everything's in teams. So if you didn't know how to work with a team and contribute to a team, you're not going to go very far at McKinsey. So I had to learn that. And the thing that was so scary, is back in the day, they would have this test, and you'd be in a room and you had all these smart people, and they were Baker scholars, and they're all top in their class. And they would play this, and it was serious. They would say, so what? So if you came up with this brilliant idea that you thought would just knock them off, they would say, so what? Prove it. So that really, it forced me to think differently, but I had to build up my confidence, because that could have demoralized me. So I would just been useless for the next. I said, I'm going to learn from that. So I did develop the self-confidence after X number of weeks or X number of months that I could really contribute. And I think the other thing that really helped me and has helped me throughout my career is I've had people who wanted to help me. And even Marvin Bauer, who was the originator, who founded McKinsey, became my friend. Ron Daniel, who became later the head of all of McKinsey and later went to Harvard as the head of their fund, he was a friend. I got to know the secretaries. I got to know many of the people, like Lou Gerstner was in my class. And these relationships that I built to not only survive, but to learn, and learn the best traits that they had and the capabilities that they had, they became my friends for the rest of my life. And that's what I like to share with many of our recent Kellogg students and graduates. You're gonna have a wonderful experience with some of the brightest people in the world on your campus. Don't take it for granted. Really learn from each other. Be team players, like I had to learn to be a team player at McKinsey, and accept these people are going to be part of your life, many of them, for the next 20 or 30 years. And I know it's hard for people to see that when they're in their 20s and their early 30s, but it's real. And it should not be taken for granted. And I never took it for granted.
So this is actually a lot of great suggestions towards, the path of leadership. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But first, I want to build on something you said at the beginning, right? You've worked with corporation, government, non-profit, so many different aspects. And reading the book, I see you also have point of view on how can you have the most impact in terms of improving economic conditions for Blacks and other minorities. So what is that your point of view, right? Which areas today also in particular are most poised to be the most impactful in terms of changing the economic landscape for minorities?
I would say candidly, changing the mindset. Okay, so, as a consultant, but as a professor, and let me just say this, I'm going to get back to your question. It has been a two-way street with me at Kellogg. I've enjoyed my 25 plus years at Kellogg as a teacher. I love being in the classroom, teaching class and diversity. I enjoyed, being on the board. And so it's a give back to that. But I think one of the things that, in dealing with very important people and very important issues, sometimes you have to change the mindset in terms of what is important, what is not important, what is factual, what is not factual, what could be impactful and what could have a minimal impact on situations. So that's what I always try and do. And to be very candid, is that I really believe in the free enterprise system. I'm a capitalist. I've lived in a socialist country. It doesn't work. So I'm a strong capitalist. I'm a strong believer in the free enterprise system, even though it doesn't work always perfectly, but it's nothing better. So I believe in that. And so what I've always argued, if we could get more people, more women, more minorities who are really players in the free enterprise system, major contributors in the free enterprise system, in the economic system of our country and other countries, the world would be better. And I think historically that has not been accepted. That has not been really talked about often and has never been talked about in the rooms that it should have been. So that's what I've always tried to do. And that's why I gravitated to the whole area of minority business development. Because when I looked around, we had our own heroes, but they were small players in a very big field. So I said, we have to do better. We have to do a better job of trying to get more people who have the same brain power, who can think just like anybody, but they have to change their mindset, and the people have to be more receptive to them in the contributions that they can make. And if we can form these strategic alliances, we can make our company stronger, we can make our country stronger, and we can make the world stronger. And I really believe that. I worked in Tanzania for a while, and it was a socialistic country, but there they took what we had to offer in terms of our analytical abilities. We decentralized government. So it was a socialistic country, but I think at the end, the president thanked me, I was leading the team, and he thanked others for making a major contribution. And the decentralization is still in place. Like 40 years later. So that's what I'm all about. That's what I've been about.
And actually, I love, this is what is amazing of your stories. Like you say, you had amazing influence on the development of an entire country. It's not even, but this is so important. And given that you talk about Tanzania or just globally, it's actually, there is a question here, some questions starting to arrive. There's a question from Barb who starts to say, hey, Jim, great to see you. And then she asks, can you talk about how to get the world engaged on diversity? Some this as a US issue, particularly Black equality. We've pushed inclusion as a way to talk about diversity. Curious what you've seen.
How to get, I just want to understand, I think I know which Barbara that is too. How to get more people really embracing or understanding diversity.
The more people in the entire world engaged on diversity, right? Because are we having it as a US issue, or how do we make it a global issue? That's a way.
No, and I've been saying, that's a great question, because as I started out, many years ago, it was perceived, because of the civil rights movement, first as a Black issue. It wasn't even a diversity issue, because people were dying in the streets and dying in the South. Then it became a diversity issue. Then it became a US diversity issue. But I never thought that was fair, and it wasn't wise. Because when you look at, and Francesca, because you're from Italy, and Europe, right? There are these nuances even in European countries, even Nordic countries, where there are differences, and they're not really appreciated to the extent. And you have in England now, they're trying to pass laws so women can go on boards and have quotas. So it shouldn't be forced that way, but it's making people realize it ain't just the United States. It is, we have our own issues. And I think it was so dramatic when George Floyd was killed and statues were being overturned. They were being overturned in England. They were being overturned in France. They were being overturned in Asian countries. And I think what they were saying, that some of the people there could see many of the things that were happening to us in the United States were also happening there. It's different culture, different demographics, but their issues, or many of them, are really very similar. And so I think it's better. And the old expression that we used to use is when, the canary in the coal mine. And they used to have canaries in the coal mine because if there wasn't any air, the canary would die. And I would say the same kind of analogy holds true for people looking at the US. We're kind of like the canary. So look at us, see what's happening in the US, but that could easily happen to you in a few years if you don't get your act together. Yes.
I see, you're clearly inspiring, because I see quite a lot of questions pouring in. And given that you talked a bit like a quotas, like in Europe on boards, there's a question here. What's your thoughts on corporate boards not having diversity, and what's the solution?
Oh, it's a great question. And as you know, and I'm not pitching Kellogg again, but every year we bring people from all over the country to talk about corporate governance. And I probably say the same thing every year. I've been a strong believer in having diversity on the boards. I think that some unique insights and that brings value to the shareholders, but I say very clearly, and sometimes people kick back, I say, just don't put numbers on a board. Because if you bring somebody on the board who happens to be Black or happens to be Hispanic, cannot define the problem, cannot help the CEOs and the board really deal with issues, you're not adding to the value. You're not adding to the shareholders' value. You're not helping the company. So be very selective on whomever you put on the board who might be of a diverse background, that you've done your homework on it. And they're not people who are just going to be satisfied sitting on a board and crossing off and getting board fees. I want some people to roll up their sleeves. I want people to educate. I want people to listen. I want people to understand what the boards are saying so they can go back into the community and articulate what are the issues and what are the trends and how we should be a part of the trends going forward. I want somebody to be real valuable board members. And I say that every year. So I'm going to be very strongly saying I think we should have diversification, but if it's only in terms of numbers, I'm not for it because I don't think it really adds value to what you want to do.
Thank you. And here there's Gwen is asking, while we have an Institute for Inclusion at Morgan Stanley, I'm often in talks with clients or executives about those uncomfortable conversations. What advice would you offer to executives who need to start a conversation about social injustice or equity with its own senior employees of color?
Well, the first thing I would say to her is they are to invite me back to Morgan Stanley because I designed the original diversity and inclusion strategy for Morgan Stanley 25 years ago, dealing with the same issue. And I take pride in that because I'm not saying it because we did it, because James H. Lowry and Associates did it, but it was another challenge because I'd never done Wall Street. And I looked at Wall Street, and Wall Street's different. The financial institutions are different. So it was a big challenge. And one of my clients was John Mack, who later became the CEO. And they asked the same questions back then. And what I did, and I spent a lot of time there. I spent 2 years there. They stole my best person. I didn't care. And I think Morgan Stanley was the model at that time, 25 years ago. And Bill Lewis was the guy who was my client along with John Mack. But I think what we did, we spent hours spending with the senior partners at Morgan Stanley. So have them understand what it was all about, what they could do, what they were saying, and the real value. And I think the other thing that we did was to, and this was before it was as fashionable, we delineated between the need to have coaches, mentors, and sponsors. And we had a series of meetings. I would go throughout the organization, and I still believe that because I think in many of the institutions, especially professional service firms, they don't understand that, and they're not very good at developing strategies that delineate the difference between a coach, a mentor, and a sponsor. Because if you don't have a sponsor in many of these companies, you can't make it. But I think the critical thing is a mentor. And what I say is that people should be a good mentor. And there are tricks to being a good mentor. If anybody's interested, I can send them an article I wrote on this, on being a good mentor, but being a good mentee. So I think too often, many of our younger people are not good mentees. They want to take, or they take for granted, or they misuse the time of talented people who want to help them in their careers, and they don't understand how valuable the time is for very important people. But I think the communication, the trust is important. Sharing, and this is very important, sharing really what are the 5 or 6 things that the average, very aggressive, very smart, well-educated professional needs to know to make it to be partner. And too often, the communication is not there to have that information transferred in a way that the individual, the young professional gets it and can act on it. The other thing the young professional, and both of them have to be able to do, is in the trust, is to say things that are going to make people flinch. And I can look back on my career, and I can even give you names of people who did it. And they said, Lowry, I don't believe you did such a dumb thing. Or Lowry, I don't believe you let that happen. Oh, Lowry, why did you do this? And I had to flinch because I was embarrassed. But I never made the same mistakes again. And that's how you learn. And that's how you become a big dog in a big operation. And if you don't have people sharing that with you, you never learn, and you'll keep making the same mistakes.
This is so inspirational, Jim. And I'm seeing several questions around the theme that I actually wanted to ask you myself. So someone asking, start actually by citing the Economist magazine published an article 3 weeks ago about Black-owned businesses and mentioned that Black-owned businesses make up 2.2% of all United States businesses, but only account for less than 1% of business receipts generated, and how to do it. And this is actually related to a general theme I wanted to ask you, which is, what is the way that today established leaders can help create wealth in communities of color? And if I can add also a twist that you can address at the end, do you have a different advice for how leaders of color should tackle this low goal versus white leaders?
Yeah, this is what I spent my whole life. So this could take up the whole
Yes.
hour. Yeah. But I will try.
Please take it.
I'm going to try and be terse in dealing with it. Let's deal with it from a very practical way. I mean, and I know, and many of your professors on the campus knows where the economies are going, but in the United States or global economies. What industries are going to be the fastest growing industries in a global economy? And what are the new products that have to be changed almost on a bi-monthly basis to be effective in this new? That information is not shared with people of color in the way it should be. And so you mentioned AMAP, the Advanced Management Education Program. And this was one of the great Kellogg stories, is that it was a CEO of Sears went to the president of the National Minority Supplier Development Corporation, Harriet Michelle, and said, many of the minorities that are in your membership will never be able to do business for Sears. Never. They're just too small. They're too undercapitalized, or there's a weak organ, and they'll never do business with Sears. He said, you solved that problem. So she called me up. And so it's a difference in age when they call you Jimmy. So, Jimmy, I got to talk to you. We got to do this. She said, we got to come up with something that can elevate the minority businesses from tier 3 to tier 2 to tier 1 suppliers. Because my boss, who's the chairman of the council, said, this is my number one priority. We got to be able to tackle this. I then, because I was on the board of Kellogg, I called up Don. I said, Don, here's this thing. You know the president. I know him. I said, Art Martinez. I said, he challenged it. We got together over a weekend. Don, myself, Art Martinez, and designed this thing called the Advanced Management Education Program. That was in 1996. We have had that program on the campus of Kellogg. It's coming next year, or this year. We're going to have 40 other new people coming on board. We screened them from around the country. So they come on the campus for one. We have the best professors. Many of the professors who started with me in 1996 are still with the program. So they're part of that ecosystem. And I cannot tell you how proud I am of that program, because many of these people who started out in that program, in 96 or, over the years, are the leading people in America for minority business. And they when they say, and they do, and I'll run into them in airplanes and they'll say, Mr. Lowry, or they still call me Professor Lowry, or Dr. Lowry, which I don't really qualify for. But anyway, they said, when I went to Kellogg, I was successful from the way I looked at it. After Kellogg, not only I became more successful, I became rich. Because you gave us the mindset and the skills to elevate our thinking, to think bigger and better, to become tier 1. So our alumni, which there are over 860 of them, are like the who's who of minority business. And there's a similar program at Tuck, and I love the guy who's running it, but I still think Kellogg's better. And to show you the power of this, Janice Howard, who was one of our participants, was rated as one, I think she was the 36th richest woman, not Black woman, women in America, self-made. She does over $3 billion. She's in 30 different countries. Then we've had Joe Anderson, who created a $1 billion company and sold it to his CEO. Both of those were in my program, okay? We had Jimmy Leotard, who started something, but you guys didn't even know this, and he was Black, called Jimmy John Sandwiches. He sold it for, that was out of a Kellogg program. So we've had Randall Pinkett, who's been on, he was the first Black guy, I'm sure he's ashamed of it, on The Apprentice. But, PhD, we've had some outstanding people, and they're so proud of this relationship. But what do we try and do in a week's time? And I have to give credit to my good friend, Michelle Rogers, who's been with me for so many years. What we try and do, and we get the best professors, we identify what they're missing, and most of them don't understand capital. So they're great salesmen, they have great product. So we are heavy duty into capital and how do we plan for capital, how to get capital, use and invest in capital and really diversify out of capital into when you want to sell. But we also give them the mindset. So what we got to do, once again, to get to the private sector, we have to start thinking differently, because I think too long we delegated this, and with no disrespect, to very talented, inspired young people who want to be a part of minority business, but they don't have the juice, they don't have the power to really influence people to give Blacks and women and Hispanics the opportunity to bid on major contracts. I think the other thing, which I'll probably say over and over, because I strongly believe it, many of the rules that we deal with every day in any business are the same for minority business. So you have to get, you've heard this same expression, you invest in this company, who's the jockey? It's the same thing. We don't want to invest in a jockey who's weak. I don't care what color it is. We're going to invest in, we want to have a product that makes sense, not because it's a Black product or a brown product. We want to have it who can sell on the market and can be very competitive at a competitive cost. We want to have somebody who can come up with a plan that we know is a good plan. If we put money into it, if I put my money into it, it's going to take off. I mean, and so these are the things that we cannot violate in when we're looking at minority business. But I say to the people of color, don't keep doing the same thing, or don't keep competing against other, and I shouldn't say this, but I should. Don't keep competing against other Black people or other Hispanic people or other minority people. Compete against the market. Make your firm that much stronger so you can compete against anybody. When I started my firm, I didn't want to compete against the next Black consulting firm. I was going to compete against McKinsey and BCG. And when my firm was stated as one of the top 100 consulting firms, it wasn't a Black minority firm. It was one of the top. Kennedy rated us as one of the top consulting firms. And then my mistake is I said, once I got that award, I could retire. That was stupid. I could have taken that and run it. But anyway, I didn't know any better. So that's what we got to do. And so that's what we're doing. BCG, I'm very proud of, and I'm sure McKinsey's doing the same thing. But what we're doing at BCG is trying to come up, working with the commercial club, with the civic committee, kind of a template that we could take to any city and say, if this city wants to do this and grow the number of viable, growth-oriented, multi-million-dollar companies, here's the 5 or 6 things you got to do. Here's what you got to do in terms of the organization. Here's what you got to do in terms of access to the markets. Here's what you got to do in terms of getting capital and utilizing. And we're working with a lot of other people. So it's a long-winded way, but it's very close to my heart.
Yes, and we are very grateful for what you're doing, and also to Michelle, because we at Kellogg, because we feel really this is a way for Kellogg to have an impact outside, which is amazing, and amplify. But I want you mentioned a couple of people going also through the program, which are now billionaires, and I know you've talked about wanting to see dozens of Black billionaires spread across U.S. cities in the next decade. Can you explain why is this goal important, and what will be the impact of that new wealth?
Oh, I have a vision, but let's just deal with the way things are. So I'll use as example 2 people that I have the utmost respect for to kind of demonstrate or give you an answer to that. Oprah Winfrey. She's a billionaire. And I followed her. I followed Oprah when she came. Most people don't realize she started in Chicago. She started on a local, ABC station in Chicago, and she blew up. But she started out, it was local, TV station. And then I've watched her ever since. I've seen what she's done. I've seen the impact that she's had. So she, with her own studios, how many people has she trained? I've seen how she has given money to young kids in South Africa. I've seen how she wrote a check for over, I don't know, it was a big check, to start the Smithsonian Museum on Black. the rippling effect of her generosity, of her genius, of her sharing has had a tremendous impact. And I keep saying this, and I say in the book, not only for Oprah and the people who are part of her organization, but for our society. I would take more recent person would be Robert F. Smith. Most people didn't know about Robert F. Smith before he was a keynote speaker or was a convention, the speaker at Morehouse's graduation convocation, and he told everybody in the room, "I'm going to pay for your loan." Nobody heard of him. Now we knew about it. We knew that he had 22 the tech companies. We knew that that he was worth as much as he was, but just think of the impact that he has had. And then when you start dealing with just power and just the way things are, the given, he's on a first name basis with Jamie Dimon. He's on the first name basis through the business roundtable with a lot of very powerful people. And he is being heard because he is at the table as an equal. And when I think about, our universities, and we're blessed at Northwestern and we're blessed at Kellogg, we have very generous people who every year you will go see and they write checks. We got to get more check writers. I mean, we got to get more people who are writing checks for the right reasons. And they have demonstrated that. I mentioned Janice Howard, came out of a small historically Black college in North Carolina. And she went through heck just to get through high school. She was chased home from a small town in North Carolina, did extremely well. Every year she writes a check to the North Carolina AT. Every year she plays that, she does that role. Arts, who's contributing to what arts? The mayor potential mayor of New York City, he is a great art selector. I mean, so he had that money. I just think for different reasons, the largesse of many people, and it's not just our culture. I went to Francis Parker in Chicago at that time. It was a large percentage of Jewish people who were students and also parents. And I watched how they gave to Jewish causes, how they supported Jewish art, they scholarship programs. And I saw that. So I saw that rippling effect when I was in 8th grade at Francis Parker as a scholarship kid. And I said, why couldn't we have the same rippling effect in the Black community? So I really believe in that. The interesting thing, and you talk about my book, I had more people come to me, said, Mr. Lowry, I want to be part of your first wave of billionaires. I said, okay, let's talk, but you got to have a plan. You can't have a wish, But that's the one statement that I put in the book that I could probably get the most reaction. Lowry, you're right about billionaires. I want to be one of them. I said, okay, let's talk. But,
now I'm having so many questions, so I'm apologizing in advance to everybody because I don't think I will be able to make justice to all the questions. But given that you talked a bit about visibility, there is a question here saying, thank you for your important work. What role can media have as a strategic ally for diversity?
No, these are great questions. I hope these alums are pretty smart. No, I think the media, we've seen, there's a different media. When I started out, in the late 60s, there were 3 major TV stations. And we had 3, Walter Cronkite was the voice of America. Well, there's difference now. So we have cable, we have social media. Many of my things are through social media. So when we start talking about the media, it's very tricky because we see the danger of having the wrong people putting out the wrong dialogues and the wrong images and the lies. And it's dangerous. So I think the burden should be for the people of goodwill who want to do the right things for not only for their companies, their communities, but for the nation, is to have a counterbalance of that. And that's why I'm speaking a lot on Zooms, because I think that there should be people explaining why, instead of just, because it's not just because I want people of color or women to be rich. I want them to be involved to really be decision makers on major decisions that can control our destiny. And so we have to be able to articulate why that is important. why there is a business case for minority business. Why is there a business case for women on boards? Why is there a business case for people thinking bigger and thinking globally? One of the things that I say, I believe that there is a global connectability on people of color, especially of African Americans in Africa. They're billionaires. I mean, there's a lot of billionaires in Africa. Are we talking to them? I know Kellogg has sent kids there, but are we sending there to just grow fruit? Are we trying to send them there to make this connection? Because we know that some of them want to invest in the United States, but they don't know with whom they should invest the money. And so there's a whole lot of things that we could be doing differently that I think we should be.
You're actually right. We can do more, and it's about also rethinking, right? Why are we doing something, and can we do it differently? And no, you're absolutely right. There's a question here that says, can you talk about the difference between equity and D&I, and offer your thoughts on how management teams and boards can be effective in the area of equity?
Yeah, when we talk about racial equity, and being a BCG, I hate to bring this up, but McKinsey, no, I'm just kidding. McKinsey's done some great research on why equity is so important. When you start looking at how much money is not generated because we have not dealt with race in the way we should have. So if you really deal with the opportunities that were there that we didn't take advantage of, and you start looking at the difference in terms of equity, in terms of what we own, and there are studies that we do this, I've done studies on it, and we're seeing that in a household, that white households have increased like 19% over a given period of time. It's in the book. Hispanics a little, much slower, and Blacks have gone backwards. So if you have Black households, net worth going backwards, not only is that affecting that family, not only is it affecting Blacks on the West Side, the South Side of Chicago, but it's affecting the society. And nothing is more dramatic on this issue when COVID came out. It didn't come as any shock to us that a disproportionate number of the people who were going to be affected were going to be brown and Black, because they had to take the jobs that were available to feed their families. So they had to do it. And they still had to go out and try and fight that battle. It doesn't shock us a disproportionate number who died from this because of those facts. So the flip side is also, because of the past and because of many things we talked about in the Zoom, the most vulnerable were minority businesses, were either undercapitalized or not strong enough to survive during this period of time. So once again, at the end, we're going to come out of this hopefully this year. And in 2022, we'll be back to normal. But there are going to be a lot of dead corpuses around America who did not survive, both literally and figuratively. So that's not going to help us. It's not going to help our society. It's not going to help the world. And so that's why I really feel that we have to think differently so that we can avoid that. We can't kick the can. We have to deal with that reality in very imaginative, out of the box thinking, or else we're going to have some serious problems.
Yes.
And you've seen it. I mean, you've seen it come in. We don't want to go too dramatic, but you've seen it in Europe.
Yes.
You've seen it in Europe. You've seen it, when in the 20s and 30s in Germany, where the economy was so weak, people become very vulnerable for weak thinking and facts and lies, and people that can be blamed for the problems that are much more complex than because they're the bad people because they happen to be Jewish or they happen to be Black and Jewish. We've seen that. I've seen it in Latin America where I lived. So there's a danger if that wealth disparity is so great, what it represents to the society, not just to those groups, the affected groups.
That is so thoughtful. And, you know, it actually, there's a question here, which is kind of a immediate follow-up. It says, I'd welcome your thoughts on the DEI's role in reversing the accelerating trends of political, societal, and economic polarization that fosters greater extremism. What role do corporations play in this?
You know, and I'm glad that that question was asked, because, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't, you know, give credit to major corporations around the country are saying the right things, taking action immediately when they feel it should be, not hiding behind weak statements, and really finally putting serious money in, you know, they're talking billions now. And so because I was a BCG partner, they used to see these checks for $1 million. I said, well, you know, $1 million is not going to do anything. You know, they doesn't even buy the cigars that we would smoke at cocktail parties. So when they start talking about billions of dollars, corporate America is telling me, and the CEOs are behind this are telling me they get it. And so I think we're at a reflection period in our history. I praise them for doing that. And I think the onus is on us, and you kind of asked me the question previously, what are we going to do as Blacks, as leaders within these organizations to take advantage of the goodwill, get advantage of the boldness that CEOs are making, and the money they're allocating to affect positive change. So that's part on us, but it's also on the leadership of the major institutions that you know so well.
This is amazing, and this is also again, there's so many. I apologize, Jim. I will send you all the questions remaining at the end because they are so thoughtful and so important. So I'm just struggling. But this is kind of also following what you're saying. First, hi James, thank you for your time today. What would you say is the biggest challenge faced by people of color in modern corporations? And what would be the key priorities for management to adopt to make the necessary changes to foster this change? In part is what we were talking, but more generally, yes.
I think the biggest one, which I always advocate, and I advocated not for just people of color, but for people, because in the course at Kellogg, I used to say that I had this trick, what I would say that there are primary and secondary characteristics of every person. And the primary are things you can't change. I am a male, I'm an African-American male. I can't change that. But my life experiences on the outer, the secondary characteristics were the things that just made me as a unique person. I didn't go to Vietnam, I went to Peru. I went to Tanzania. I didn't fight in the army, I did this, I was a Peace Corps. So these makes it, so I say very candidly, what every major corporation should do, and the people in the C-suite, is respect that each and every person in your organization is unique. And if you can really understand the uniqueness of the individuals or the collective groups and leverage it in ways that you never thought you could leverage it, I think that that's what you should do. And I don't think they do. I think too often they will have an image of what the person should look like. You know, and I remember going back to McKinsey, I had to wear a 3-piece suit. I had to have socks over my calf because that was what I had to do. Now we get a little more flexible, but I still think the biggest change should occur when people accept people as unique and can add values. What I've said for years is that people of color, to survive in this double world, we live in two worlds. I live in the South Side of Chicago world. I live in the Evanston world. They're two different worlds. But to survive over these years, I had to have a very, very sharp antenna to be able to read people, read situations, know when I could take advantage of situations, know when I can help my firm. I don't think that that's really understood or appreciated or valued. You know, and I think that that's that's a mistake. I think in especially with people of color now, because of the progress we have made, there are many chairmen and vice chairmen of, good friend of mine's a chairman of Microsoft. So we play golf together. Now, you know, I'm not going to embarrass BCG. I'm not going to tell McKinsey, does anybody kind of leverage that relationship that Jim Lowry has? And so this guy says, I helped him get to be the chairman of Microsoft. It's a different way of looking at marketing. It's as old as sin, but they don't do that. And we don't do that. And I think that there are certain things in terms of ways of looking at problems. If you're designing a car or designing a refrigerator, that women can add. And one time I had a client that made refrigerator, and I asked him, I said, how many women do you have on your design of your refrigerator? He said, not one. I said, who's using your refrigerator? Women are using refrigerator. You got to use women in a different kind of way. So I think that that's very important. I think the other one which people are trying to deal with is what I kind of say subtly, but not too. There is still this, which is many people will accept, unconscious bias. So, you got to deal with it. I've had to deal with it throughout my life. When you walk in, if you're six, like you said, I'm 6'2". I used to be 6'2". I'm now 6'1.5". I'm shrinking because I'm getting old. But seriously, you're intimidating. You're intimidating. And so you're being intimidated. And so why should I be intimidated? People should really understand who I am and listen to me and see what I can do, what I can write, how I can solve problems. So that is something that, don't form those opinions. And even there, I've done diversity, kind of cases. And I had one client for 2 years. We did it for a whole year, unconscious bias. But let me just say categorically, unconscious bias will never solve the problem. It might be a vehicle to help us solve the problem. The real trick in making major change in major corporation is getting the people in the C-suite to think differently, not major differences. I don't want them to change because they're successful because they've done certain things a certain way. Corporations are successful because they've done certain things. But the key is to get that 10% change of mindset to be able to do this. That is the key to change. And how do you do that? You got to have people at the table who maybe weren't at the table 3 weeks ago or 3 years ago, who can talk to you in a way, the same way, but come up with a different opinion, and then be able to digest it like you do any problem or any suggestion or recommendation. And if it makes sense, you go with it. If it doesn't, just because the person happens to be of color, you don't have to accept it. But at least be fair and have an open mind on many of the suggestions that you're doing. You're going to have the same problem as CEO at the business school. You're going to come up, you're already coming up with it, and God bless you. You're coming up with initiatives, and I love Don, but it's much bigger than Don had ever thought about doing. So you still got the board members, and they're many of my friends. I play golf with them. So you're going to have to sell them on why this is important for Kellogg. And that's why I'm going to stay on the board because I'll be one of your voices to tell you why it is. But to talk to my friends on the golf course. I mean, there are different ways you can skin this cat, but I think that's it. And I think we don't do it. And part of it is just representation. And I'll say it, we still don't have enough people of color and women in the C-suite. The more of them, the more you have the interaction, the more comfortable it will be, the different kinds of views you will receive. And that's so important right now is what we're going through.
Thank you. And I have to say, I have to remind everybody that this will be on YouTube. I'm so glad because, Jim, there's so much content in all of your answer. I feel like I have to go back and listen to it again. Thank you. But because we are almost running out of time, I want to make sure I ask you one question, which is about the importance of mentors. Because you mentioned it even at the very beginning, right? How important it was. You've been a mentee and you've been a mentor. What advice do you have for younger alumni who are seeking out a mentor, or for more experienced alumni who may be looking for a mentee?
Well, the first thing I would suggest, and you could be the vehicle, I think I sat down with somebody else. I wrote a piece, which I circulate all the time, on what does it mean to be a good mentee. And I would be more than willing to get it out over any.
Absolutely, we should make it available. Yes.
And I'll end by saying this because I'm dropping a dime. You could probably get it on YouTube. I did an interview on Upturn Ventures. It's a big pension fund. And they asked me to talk about that with one of my mentees. And one of my early mentees at BCG was a guy named John Stevens, who later changed his name to John Legend. And we talked about what is it meant to be, what I meant to him as being a good mentor. And he, I shared with the audience why he was a good mentee. And you underline this, we've been friends ever since I was at his wedding in Italy. And it really tells a story. But I think I put it in the article, but basically you got to establish trust on both sides. You got to be able to take hard, but very positive, constructive criticism, but you have to respect the time of the individual. You have to make the mentor feel refreshed, inspired by being a mentor. Nothing brings me, I've done a lot, but nothing brings me greater joy looking back over my career of 40 years than all the people I mentored, over time. And one in particular, which I bring up all the time besides John Legend, is Justin Dean, who I recruited from Kellogg, who's now the head of the Washington office. And he represents everything good about consulting, about being a Black leader, and being a good team player.
Well, Justin is a Kellogg alum and is also joining you on the Global Advisory Board of Kellogg. So we feel privileged to have both of you. I think, this is when I get my clue about maybe there's, I don't know if there, I can't run through all the questions, but.
I have one last question was you were going to ask me, and I thought it was a great question. It said, if you had to do your magic wand, what would you do? I think there are two things I would do. One, I would start a national campaign or strategy to get more people of color doing more joint ventures with non-minorities and elevate scale quickly. And I think we could start at Kellogg. If we did that quickly and just take the mid-market companies, we could make history. The other, if you have any young recent graduate who would come and want to work with James Lowry and take over my firm, tell them to send me a note and I'll talk to them, okay?
Great idea. This is, I just am so confident in what we are trying to do at Kellogg because I have people like Jim, and especially Jim advising me and all of us at Kellogg on how to move forward. We are committed, but we also have the best people, the best minds who have reflected on its issues advising us. We can't come up out of the blue. We need to rely on people who've been thinking and been invested in it for all their life. So I hope you can all see, how amazing Jim is and why I actually, Jim sent me a copy of his book. I already have bought it. The one I have is mine, but I'm so proud of the one he sent me because he thanked me as his friend. And Jim, I have to tell you, I am so proud you call me your friend. Thank you so much. This is Kellogg. So goodbye, everybody, for the next meeting. But thank you, Jim. This was amazing. Thank you.
Love you. I love Kellogg. Keep up the leadership that you're providing. Thank you.